Welcome to our deep dive into Nerstrand Big Woods State Park in Minnesota. I think this will be a fun one. Whether you're planning a trip or just curious about this place, this unique place, we're going to uncover some pretty fascinating details. We've got YouTube video transcripts and park websites, historical accounts, and even some personal blogs to help us paint a complete picture.
Yeah, it looks like we've got a good mix of sources here. Should be interesting to see what we find.
Definitely. So, when I was looking at all this stuff, what really struck me is how Nerstrand seems to defy expectations. Like there's this little island of wilderness in the middle of farmland.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. It's like you step into a different world. One YouTuber like hiking there in winter and came across hidden falls completely frozen solid. Pretty amazing footage.
Right. You wouldn't expect to see that in southern Minnesota, would you? It's not exactly known for its icy waterfalls.
Yeah, not at all. Southern Minnesota's prairie country. But Nerstrand is like this, remnant of this massive hardwood forest they called the Big Woods.
Oh yeah, the Big Woods. I remember reading about that. It used to cover huge parts of the state.
Right. And Nerstrand is one of the few places where you can still see what it was like. It's like stepping back in time.
This YouTuber even mentioned how the Big Woods bounced back after the last ice age. That just blows my mind. So it's not just a survivor of, human development. It's a survivor of like massive climate shifts over thousands of years.
Exactly. And that resilience is really key to understanding this park. I mean, think about all the changes that have happened in that region. Glaciers, farming, logging, you name it. Most of the Big Woods was cleared for farmland, but this little patch held on.
Why do you think this particular area survived when so much of the surrounding forest was lost? Was it just luck?
Well, there are some theories, of course. One possibility is that the specific soil conditions and topography at Nerstrand, made it less suitable for agriculture than the surrounding land. But it's hard to say for sure.
Yeah. And then you have the human element too, right? The historical accounts really get into how land ownership played a role. Back in the 1850s, the area that's now Nerstrand was divided into all these small woodlots owned by individual families.
Lots of small landowners instead of one big one.
Right. They used the trees for fuel and building small-scale stuff. But that actually prevented large-scale logging. Kind of ironic, isn't it?
It is. This fragmented ownership, which you might think would make the land more vulnerable, actually protected it in a way. And then in the 1930s, when logging companies were trying to buy up huge tracts of land, they ran into a problem at Nerstrand. Too many owners to deal with.
I can only imagine trying to negotiate with over 160 different landowners.
Right. Talk about a logistical nightmare. It's fascinating how this situation unintentionally shielded the woods from being clear-cut.
And then there's that story about the Wisconsin logging company that came in with an offer to buy up all the land. That really seemed to light a fire under the local community.
It did. People realized they had to do something to protect the woods, so they started organizing, raising money, even doing land swaps to create a continuous area for the park.
That's amazing. It was a real grassroots effort. So much passion went into saving those trees.
And it really speaks to a broader point about conservation efforts. They often succeed when local communities are deeply invested in protecting a place.
Absolutely. And it's not just about preserving trees, right? Nerstrand has this incredibly rich ecosystem that goes beyond just the forest itself.
Oh yeah, there's a lot more to discover there. More than meets the eye. Yeah, one of the things that makes Nerstrand so special is its biodiversity. It's home to all sorts of plants and animals that you wouldn't find out on the prairie,
Yeah, I was reading about that, like all these amazing spring wildflowers, especially this one, the dwarf trout lily. Have you heard of that?
The dwarf trout lily. Yeah, I've read about that one. It's actually endangered, isn't it?
It is, and Nerstrand is one of its only habitats. That's pretty crazy to think about.
Yeah, it is. It just goes to show how important Nerstrand is for conservation. The dwarf trout lily is very particular. It needs north-facing slopes, a certain type of soil, and just the right amount of shade. And Nerstrand has all of that.
Wow, it's like the perfect spot for it. It makes you realize how delicate these ecosystems can be, right? One small change and a species like that could just vanish.
Absolutely. And it's not just about protecting individual species, it's about preserving this whole web of relationships. Everything's connected.
Right. Speaking of delicate ecosystems, I was reading about the geology of hidden falls. Apparently that limestone shelf that creates the falls is slowly eroding.
Oh yeah, so the waterfall is changing over time.
That's what it sounds like. The erosion is actually causing the waterfall to slowly move upstream. Isn't that wild?
It is. It just goes to show that even these seemingly permanent features of the landscape are constantly changing.
And it's happening so slowly too, like over thousands of years. It's hard to even wrap your mind around that kind of time scale.
It really is, but that's geology for you. It's all about these slow and steady processes that shape the world around us.
So for those of us who maybe aren't, expert hikers, what are the trails like at Nerstrand? Are they pretty challenging?
Well, from what I've seen, the trails are generally pretty well maintained. They seem to cater to a variety of fitness levels. The Hidden Falls Trail, for example, is only about a mile loop.
Oh, okay, that's pretty manageable.
Yeah, most people should be able to handle that one, even if you're not a seasoned hiker.
Good to know. And of course, Nerstrand has a campground too, right? What are the options like there?
Yeah, they've got a good range of options. Sites with electric hookups if you want to be a little more comfortable walk-in sites for more of a secluded experience, even group campsites for, larger gatherings.
So there's something for everyone.
Yeah, pretty much. They've definitely thought about how to make the park accessible to different types of visitors.
I love that. And, one little detail that caught my eye, one of the bloggers mentioned that there are tons of black raspberries in like late June, early July.
Black raspberries? Really?
Yeah, apparently. And the park actually encourages people to forage for them, as long as they do it sustainably, of course.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's great that they promote that kind of stuff. Gets people more connected to nature, right? Like hands-on experience.
Definitely. And it goes back to that balance between conservation and recreation. It's not just about preserving nature, it's about making it accessible to people, too.
As we've been talking about all this, I've been thinking about a lot of what we're talking about is like the classic park stuff, the trails, the waterfall, the wildflowers. But there's some other interesting aspects of Nerstrand that I think are worth exploring too. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. Like, what are you thinking of?
Well, one thing that I noticed is that Nerstrand manages to be both a popular destination and a relatively uncrowded one. How often do you find that combination?
Not very often. That's a pretty rare find.
Right. So how do they pull that off?
Well, I think part of it that Nerstrand is kind of off the beaten path. It's not as well known in some of the bigger national parks, but it offers a lot of the same things. The natural beauty, the recreation, you name it.
It's like a hidden gem.
Yeah, exactly. And that sense of discovery is part of what makes it so special.
I totally agree. Another thing that keeps coming up is the strong sense of community around Nerstrand. We talked about those families that own the woodlots and the people who fought to protect the woods. But that spirit seems to still be alive today.
Yeah, it definitely does. There's that Friends of Nerstrand group that's super active. They do all sorts of stuff to support the park.
Like what?
Well, they organize volunteer events, raise money for conservation project, advocate for the park's future, all that good stuff.
That's so cool. It really shows how much people care about this place.
Yeah, it does. And it just goes to show you how important community involvement is when it comes to conservation.
As we've been talking, I keep coming back to something you said earlier about the dwarf trout lily and its very specific habitat requirements.
Oh, yeah. What about it?
It just makes you wonder what other seemingly small or insignificant parts of an ecosystem might actually have a much larger impact than we realize,
That's a good question. It's easy to overlook the little things, isn't it?
It is, and it's a reminder that we still have so much to learn about how nature works, all the interconnectedness of it all.
Yeah, there's always more to discover.
Yeah, and it's not just about, pretty flowers and stuff. It's about all the ways that these ecosystems support us too, like clean air and water, all that.
Right. It's easy to forget how much we depend on these places.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given me a new appreciation for Nerstrand Bigwood State Park. I always knew it was special, but I never really understood why.
Yeah, it's a pretty incredible place when you think about it. All that history and the ecology, the community, it all comes together there.
So for those of you listening, if you ever get the chance to visit Nerstrand, I highly recommend it. It's like stepping back in time, and a chance to experience what this part of Minnesota used to be like before all the farms and cities.
Right. And remember, what you see at Nerstrand is just a small part of what the Big Woods used to be. I mean, it covered huge areas of the state. It's pretty mind-boggling.
Yeah, it is. It's a good reminder that even in a world that's, constantly changing, there are still these places where you can connect with nature in a really meaningful way.
And those connections are so important.
Absolutely. So we encourage you to learn more about Nerstrand, maybe even plan a visit, check out the park's website, connect with the Friends of Nerstrand group, or watch those YouTube videos we mentioned for a visual tour.
Yeah, and as you explore Nerstrand, or any natural area for that matter, keep this question in mind. What other hidden connections and untold stories are out there just waiting to be discovered?
That's a great thought to leave our listeners with. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Nerstrand Bigwood State Park. We hope you enjoyed it.